What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Giant Voices podcast. This episode is a podcaster's dream because I get to interview a legend in the industry. His name is John Danes. He started his podcast less than a year ago. He's already grown it to be a top 100 business podcast. He's landed guests like Grant Cardone, Kern, John Mallott, and other power players. In this episode, we talk about how to position yourself as an expert in the industry. We talk about using your podcast to grow your business. And more importantly, he talks about how being fearless is your greatest strength. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, thinking about going into online business, this episode will be great for you to hear. Really appreciate you all listening. If you enjoy the show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. It's all greatly appreciated, and enjoy.
Do you ever wonder how some podcasts get thousands of new listeners and you don't? Do you wonder how people get featured in major publications? Do you ever wonder how Instagram videos go viral? Welcome to the Giant Voices podcast, hosted by Carson Jones. Every week, we bring you the biggest names in podcasting, marketing, and public relations to help you break through the noise and take your brand to the next level. Oh, and we like to mix in the uncomfortable topics like mental health, anxiety, and the internal battles that keep us from growing. Now, let's get to the show.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Giant Voices podcast. I'm your host, Carson Jones. Today, I have on another guest. His name is John Danes, founder of 99 Media. John's a marketing expert and host of the No Excuses Show, which over the past year has actually become a top 100 business podcast. John's interviewed big power players like Grant Cardone, John Mallott, Kern, countless others. He turned the ripe age of 20 years old. And in that time, he's accomplished more than a lot of people do in their lifetime. Proud to call him a really good friend of mine. And John, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, man, I appreciate that powerful intro and honored to know you as well, buddy. I always laugh when I'm speaking or when I'm introduced to somebody. I'm like, man, you made me sound a lot cooler than I am, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
Hey, man, you're building your own celebrity up. So, which is crazy because I think when we started talking, I didn't quite realize that you were 20 years old at the time, 19. I remember when I was 20 years old, I was in college playing baseball. I absolutely had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know what I was eating for dinner at that time. So, who is John Danes and how did you get started down this path?
Yeah, man. Well, I tell people all the time, the person you're meeting today is, polar opposites of the person you would have met 3 years ago. But basically moved around my whole entire life. I've lived in multiple different states. So that right there was the biggest blessing that could ever have come upon me, right? I'm meeting new people. I'm learning communication skills. A lot of time, I live in the South now. I live in Nashville. And a lot of the people I meet, they've lived here their whole life. And then they wonder why they can't hold a conversation with somebody. And it's because you got forced into your friend group, and that's who you stayed with and who you hung with. So you were kind of pressed to go out and meet new people and create new conversations and learn how to communicate. Because I would say the reason that I've had all the success I've had up to this point is because of my communication skills. But I moved all around my whole life, hated school. 10th grade, got kicked out of high school, actually. Basically, my only strong suit in high school was I played baseball, and I was pretty good at it. But failing grades in every class, got in trouble every day, very, very rarely actually attended school, and then got kicked out. Then transitioned into homeschooling. So when you're homeschooled and you're in high school, your high school 9th through 12th, you teach yourself. It's not your mom sitting down with you and saying, "Hey, John, this is what we're going to cover today." You're getting in the book yourself. You're taking the test yourself. And that was a big blessing too, because I started to learn and practice self-education. So I was basically teaching myself this whole curriculum. And I noticed that, we waste a lot of time in the traditional school system. So I had a lot more free time being homeschooled. And I actually learned a lot better too, the actual material that I was given for being homeschooled. So I ended up taking a class in 11th grade called Dave Ramsey's Personal Finance. And whether you hate, love, like Dave, I know most people are, polar opposites. They either love him or they hate him. I have no opinion on him, but I would read these books. And at the time I was working a job, and I've always had the, habit of splurging, spending all my money when I was in high school. That's just what I wanted to do. And I was working 40 hours a week, so I was making pretty decent money. And I started to dig deep in this Dave Ramsey stuff. And at that point, I was reselling rare sneakers and clothing. I was making good money doing that. I was working my job and I was in school. So I was pretty, hard pressed. And when you're homeschooled, you don't really have a lot of friends. So that was where my focus was at. And basically, I didn't have a good trajectory by any means, Carson. I was just kind of going with the flow, and I didn't know what I was going to do after high school. So basically, how I interpreted Dave's content was, dude, if you save your money and you manage it right, you can be rich. Doesn't matter. There's people calling into a show that made 50 grand in a year, and that a few years later with the right money habits, they're millionaires. So I'm watching this stuff. I'm like, man, this actually might be true. This whole, being smart with your finances, creating budgets, all that. So I got really interested in, financial freedom and personal finance. So that's kind of where I got my start. And then I quickly started to realize when I was running my own business and when I was introduced to some other people that were business owners that, hey, man, this is a real thing. Neither of my parents were entrepreneurs. So I thought being an entrepreneur was just like a pipe dream. You only see the real successful entrepreneurs on TV. But, there's companies out there that have 50 employees and they're making, they're grossing $200 million a year. So it's not only the companies that we see on the news, but it's the companies that are behind the scenes that are actually, also creating empires. So I didn't realize that being an entrepreneur was a thing again. So I started to dive deep into the online, education. So obviously, first thing I did, right, was how to make money online on Google. I was already doing my sneaker reselling business, but it just wasn't not a long-term scalability thing, right? So start seeing these ads by this guy, Tai Lopez. Most of people have probably heard of him if you know anything about online entrepreneurship. And I was like, dude, this guy's a scam. Like, there's no way this is real. There's no way you can actually create income online and build a business. So I just started, watching and consuming all his free content. And I said, you know what? I'm going to buy this guy's stuff and see what he has to offer. So started learning about, social media marketing, dove into his stuff. It was, I liked Ty a lot. I learned a lot from his content and his programs. Then I went and, took all the money I had, filed my company, and just started rocking and rolling with the agency. And one of the biggest things, I wanted a medium and a vehicle to meet people. Was still scaling the agency, was still working on it, but I wanted something because I was living in Atlanta at the time and I didn't really know anybody. So I wanted a resource where I could meet and connect with, big entrepreneurs. So I started the podcast. And, very quickly, like you said, the podcast scaled. And that's pretty much the basic rundown of how I got to where I am and everything that led up to me. That's kind of a little rant.
No, I love it, John. So it's funny. We talk all the time, but I had no clue that Tai Lopez was the way you got started into this. We have a lot more in common than we even know. We play baseball. We're both from the Midwest. We both got our start in digital entrepreneurship because of our man, Tai Lopez. So he does a lot more good than a lot of people give him credit for.
That's why I hate when people give him a bad rap, man. He's inspired more people than the school system, I think, ever has. I was watching a podcast he was on the other day, and this kid was walking around the hallway at a school with a book. And this teacher came up to him and was like, you don't like to read. Why are you walking around with this book? And he said, yeah, the guy on YouTube said that if I read enough books, I can get a Lamborghini. So I think it's a funny story. That's how our brains work, man. I mean, I've met a lot of people, and I've met people that are unmotivated, and I've met people that don't really have any drive and ambition, but nobody is driven, I don't feel, by the traditional lifestyle that we've been offered and taught about. So if there's somebody that can kind of come in, whether you like him, whether you hate him, whether you think that he scammed your cousin or whatever your case may be with Ty, he's inspired so many people to get rolling with their business and really, make no excuses and, just go out there and try to make it happen.
Yeah, and it's funny. I figured we'd get off on some rants and some side conversations, but I think what people start to realize and what the reason that people are maybe exhausted by Ty is because he's everywhere and they can't really figure out what exactly he does because he does a lot of stuff, which I think that's what entrepreneurship is. It's doing a lot of stuff, figuring out what works, what's successful, and then scaling back on the stuff that doesn't work. And I think people just are exhausted from him because everywhere they go, there's Tai Lopez. But I think that's smart because he tries everything. He puts money behind everything and he's on every platform. So I think people just become exhausted by it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people, especially in the online, community of entrepreneurship, everybody says you got to pick a niche. You got to pick one thing. You got to become an expert in that thing. So I think it might throw a lot of people off that Ty says, here's insight on credit. Here's insight on e-commerce. Here's insight on social media marketing. Here's insight on, this, that, this, and the other thing. And so people are like, what does this guy really do? But I like his model of having a big enough influence and a big enough network of being able to bring in industry experts, sell their information under his brand, and create, some of the most successful online education programs that have ever been known to mankind.
Yeah. And not that this is going to be a Ty Lopez episode, but I think these are important lessons. Is what he understands, and what I think both of us do really well is we understand what we are really good at, and then we surround ourselves by people that are good at something else that complements or accentuates that skill.
Exactly.
So yeah, so moving on, this is something I'm really excited to talk about because we both really created a lot of success from our podcast background, but you have created a whole level of success, through your podcast, the No Excuses Show. Like, when you started your podcast, what was your vision for it, and did you have any idea that it was going to be what it is today?
No vision, man. No vision. I had no idea what it would turn into. I said, I'm going to start doing this thing. I'm going to start reaching out to people. And I just want to give people, let me backtrack a little bit. I had a mentor when I was in 11th and 12th grade. Big shout out to MPJ. He'll still come down to Nashville and we'll go eat these crazy meals and stuff. And he's so fun to be around, and he's just full of life. He's 38. He's probably 39 by now. And he's created, a pretty massive empire, even though a lot of people don't know who he is. He's not a social media guy. And all the guidance and the wisdom that I learned from him was completely new to me, right? Like I said, neither of my parents were entrepreneurs. I didn't know being an entrepreneur was a thing. I didn't even know that there was this whole world, because it really is its own world of entrepreneurship. And so I said, all the stuff that this guy taught me is going to make me ultra successful one day. And I want to be able to share this information and these stories with all kinds of other people, because he was completely untraditional, right? As most entrepreneurs are. Dropped out of college, went and started a massively successful business, made millions of dollars in his 20s, so I didn't even really know that was a thing. I thought that was a big old pipe dream. But when you're rolling around with this guy who's got this massive house, who's got a great family, who's got a huge business, multiple people working for him, you realize, hey, this isn't a pipe dream. This isn't a scam. This is real life. And this is something that's actually achievable with the right amount of work. And I just wanted to share with people that there is real people out there that are doing this. There is real people that have created success with no, traditional education or great family that they came from. That was the real goal. And looking back now, I think that's the reason that the podcast has been so successful, because the more people that I impact and the more people that I bring on to share their stories is only going to increase, the amount of people that are consuming my content.
Yeah. So that's the next thing I really want to talk about. You said something interesting on your Instagram story the other day that makes a ton of sense. In the last year, because of your podcast, you've built $1 billion network, which means the people in your network now that maybe they weren't a year or 2 years ago, the people in your network are worth $1 billion. Like, how is the podcast? And just to premise this, like, a lot of people ask me when I say, start a podcast, get on guest appearances, the power of your network. Like, how has your podcast directly or indirectly influenced your business itself?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the biggest reasons that I said that, I went and interviewed a gentleman the other day. I'm sure you've deposited a check on your phone before.
Yeah, of course.
He created that. He's from Nashville. He created that. So he's took 2 companies public. He might get pissed if he hears this, but 9-figure net worth easily. I went to his house and I interviewed him, and now that's a personal connection. So, just knowing people and he's not a big online guy. He's not, so meeting people like that and having those kind of people in your back pocket that you can call on and, that'll mentor you and all that is the biggest asset that having a podcast can create. You'll think this is pretty funny. So my grandfather called me yesterday and wished me a happy birthday. And he was like, hey, man, I've been listening to the podcast. And he told me, he said, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly you do, but it seems like you're doing a really good job at it. So my grandfather was an entrepreneur, didn't have a lot of success with it, but he tried. I got a lot of respect for him for trying. And so he's very misunderstanding of this whole online thing because he had a failed experience as an entrepreneur. Sometimes, I think that the reason that being an entrepreneur has so many bad connotations is because there's so many people that have failed at it, right? So we were talking on the phone the other day, and he asked me, he said, John, how do you monetize this thing, man? Like, how are you making money from the podcast directly? And I told him, I said, I'm not. We never ran an ad. That's never happened before. I've picked up clients that I've interviewed. I've formed joint ventures. Joint ventures with the people that I've interviewed and the people that I've connected with. And I'll get on the phone with a local real estate agent. I was actually on the way to Chattanooga yesterday, and I got on the phone with a guy who owns 2 brokerages, and he's going to turn into a client for us. And he says, dude, I've listened to the podcast. I'm a huge Grant Cardone fan. This is freaking awesome. So if anything, it's a way for me to build my network. And it's a way for my clients and the people that I'm going to be working with in the future to get a bigger, deeper look into me and realize that I know how to successfully market online. because, there has to be some kind of strategy behind building a top 100 business podcast with zero network, zero connections, and only leveraging online, never putting $1 in a promotion and just promoting it online. So I call the podcast my biggest testimonial, to be honest with you, because it's my name. It was mine. I funded the whole thing, and then I blew it up, and all offline. So that's really the biggest value from it, and the connections that you're able to make. So I think that I was really hard set on launching a course behind online, on podcasting, and I wanted to launch it for months. And I was like, man, this is such a good idea. And I called one of my good friends, Dan Da Silva, who is the king, in my opinion, the king of launching programs. He's done so well with his e-commerce programs. And I called him one night on FaceTime and I said, dude, I just want some advice on this. Do you think I should do this? And he was like, you know what? Not everybody is going to buy it. People want to get rich really fast, but they don't realize that building a network is the way that you do that. So that's why I ended up not launching the course, because a lot of people are so impatient that they don't really see the value in building a network. It's like Grant Cardone says it all the time. Would you rather have $1 billion or know 1 billion people? Well, personally, I'd like to know 1 billion people, because if you can build your network and you can build a strong group of people around you, your financial, projection is through the charts. It's through the roof. If you know enough people, and I get referrals from local people all the time that are fans of the podcast. Hey, this might be somebody that you can work with. Hey, this is somebody you should meet. And a lot of people ask me why I live in Nashville, but it's almost, I feel like the biggest reason that I like living here is because there's not anybody else out here doing, what I'm doing. And I say that with 100%, not being egotistical, but I say that because I'm really honored by how much support and that I've gotten from my audience. And now I've almost become kind of like a local celebrity, and because people know me through this vehicle of the podcast, and then they start to say, well, what else do you do? And maybe I'm able to help their cousin who owns a business, or help their uncle or their grandma. So that's the reason that that's the way that the podcast has really helped me. And, I got off on a little tangent of why I like living in Nashville, but that's also the reason. So it gives people a deeper dive and look into me, look into who I'm learning from. And it also, has built my network exponentially from nothing.
Yeah. And I think the association helps a ton. People start to connect your name with those names, and it just creates a sense of brand awareness, ton of credibility. And then, like you said, like when that day does come to where you want to launch a course, or you want to launch a product, or, you've got a book, like whatever that may be, now you've got all these people that are going to support you. Now you've got all these people that are going to back you, and access to funds, access to connections. Like that's what it's all about, because everybody's got great ideas. It's how you implement those ideas and when you implement them, I think.
No, 100%, man. I mean, it's just like building the infrastructure. Why would you not do it? Why would you not want to go connect with big influential people? It's going to take some time. It's going to take some money. It's going to take some work. But we're in the digital age where I've connected with people, and some of the people that are my best friends I've never met in person. Some of my best business connections I've never met in person. And I think the podcast is, the best way to be able to just say, hey, we're going to put a microphone in between us, and this is going to be the beginning to our relationship. I say it all the time. The people that I interview, I really double down on not just interviewing them and then saying, okay. And then, somebody looks back, or, somebody that I interviewed in the past looks back and says, oh yeah, I did a podcast with John Danes. He was cool. Never talked after that. I want people to say, me and John Danes are working on something big. I'm excited about it. So I think that there's no reason not to try to build a podcast or build a brand online, because of a massive amount of connections and the people that you can touch and impact and influence. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and before we move on, I think just the historicalness of the looking back on what the podcast is going to do for you. Like, John, you're 20 years old. Like, you coming on and being one of my first guests on this podcast, we're going to look back at this 5 years when you're a multimillionaire, and I'm going to be like, yeah, John Danes was on my podcast. He was the third guest of my show, and I think that's pretty cool too. Just being able to look back and see like how far you've come and how things have changed. I think that's pretty cool too.
100%.
So I think the easy answer to this next question is a lot of hustle, a lot of DMs, a lot of follow-ups, but you've been able to get people on your show that I think, 5 years ago, when I was 25, 27, even a couple of years ago, before I kind of got into this, I would have been shaking to even think about interviewing or having conversations with. But you're having people like Grant Cardone and Mallott, like these people on your show, on your podcast. Like, what gives you the confidence at age 20 to reach out to these media moguls, to have them on the show and to be able to interview them and stand toe to toe with brands and names like this?
My favorite quotes is, once you become fearless, life becomes limitless. So once you're able to just say, I don't really care what this person is going to think or say about my dad. One of the best things that my dad ever told me, and he used to tell me this when we played baseball, he used to say, what are they going to do? Eat you? Like these are normal people. I know that they've created massive wealth and massive success, but at the end of the day, you got to break it down and think about it that they're normal people. And I've never had a problem reaching out to the people. I don't get nervous when I interview them because I want to learn from them. And I think they respect the fact that I've took the time and the effort to reach out and talk to them. So, I think fear is something that we make up in our head. I feel that when you reach out to these people, you just have to approach it like, this is a normal guy. He's created massive success, but at one time he was in the exact same position as me. And even sometimes you got to get a little bit more confident with it and say, I feel like they're going to respect the fact that I'm where I'm at 19 or 20. And, most of these guys have come, they didn't start till they were 30. So I think that's the age thing has been a big way that I've leveraged and get these people on. But it's been, just treating them like they're normal people. They like that. And it's just relentlessly following up and getting around and associating yourself with people that are connected to them in some way. What do they say? One touch away or two touches away. That's been one of my biggest rules, because I go out and interview somebody like Coach Michael Bird, who I'm going to be probably working on some stuff with him this upcoming year. He spoke at 10X GrowthCon too. He lives 25 minutes away from me. So it does require a little stalking. It requires to see who they're around that maybe have a little bit lower barrier to entry, that have a little bit less of a following on social media. But I can tell you this, Grant Cardone is not going to associate with somebody who's done, who hasn't done a lot. So like Frank Kern, Frank Kern is a person that he's building his brand online now. A lot of the young kids don't know him. He's looking to get in front of that audience, and he's smart to do that. So, when I was able to interview Frank, and then now Frank and Grant are working together, that was a pretty easy entryway to Grant. You just have to kind of break it down that way, see who they're around. And a lot of people go straight for the kill. You got to kind of go for a few touches away, especially when you're not huge online. And then you can leverage your way up to interviewing, the big dog who you really want to interview.
I love it. And I think Grant says it a lot. You got to go on a couple dates first, right? A couple of touch points, a couple messages, share a video here and there, and then ask for the kill.
Right. 100%.
So what scares John Danes? Like what keeps you up at night?
Man, I don't want to look back on life and just be like, dude, I could have done all this stuff. I could have, if I would have worked hard enough, I could have made it big. I could have been that guy. I think that's the biggest driving motivator at this point, is just knowing that what I'm creating right now is going to compound over the next few years. So I think that when you take a step back and look at it that way, it becomes a lot, easier to work hard. It becomes, people talk a lot about doing what you love and passion. And I agree with all that to some extent, but, I don't think enough people talk about doing what you hate. I do a lot. Taxes, accounting, all that stuff. I would rather rub a cheese grater on my head, but I have to do it. It's something that has to be done by me. And this is the responsibility we take on as business owners. So I think that when you realize that it's not about necessarily doing what you, and this is my point of view, my perspective, some people might disagree. It's not always about doing what you love. It's about doing, whatever it takes to bring you to the next level. That's how I look at it. And that's what's worked for me. And I think that when you really, truly look at it like that and you motivate yourself for the future, you're going to work a lot harder. You're going to become motivated, and you're going to be ready to go out and do, what you want to do.
No, I love it. It's chasing those pain points, I think is really important. And another thing you said, you gave me kind of chills. It kind of changed my gear there. And I think about this all the time. It's the empathy to project yourself 30, 40 years in the future and think about, like, what am I going to regret not doing, as opposed to almost like doing, and a lot of people are afraid to start new things, or they're afraid to do something out of their comfort zone because they're afraid of how it's going to look. They're afraid to look like a failure in front of peers, family. They're afraid of judgment. And I would say you have to be bad at something before you can ever be good at it. And if you don't be bad to eventually be good, I think you always regret it, because you see other people that do go through that process start passing you up. And then you'll wonder why you didn't start when they did.
Exactly.
Man, yeah, it gives me chills, John. So take me through this process. So when you're getting a big name guest on, let's just take that Grant story. I think that's a cool story. Like, how did you first meet Grant? How did you start interacting with him? Like, I want to help people that are starting in the podcast world that either have their own podcast or they're starting to, get on guest appearances, whatever that may be. Like, what was that process like getting him on the show? And like, how did you position yourself as an expert to be able to make him want to come on the show?
Well, I'll say this because it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So I don't have massive Instagram following, but I have a massive amount of people that are super loyal to me. Like you probably saw yesterday, for the amount of people that, shouted me out, even for my birthday, it doesn't even make sense due to the number that you see on the followers. And a lot of that's because, I haven't went out and tried to put thousands of dollars into my Instagram because it's just, I don't feel like I really need it right now.
You mean you're not doing the loop giveaways that everybody in the world are doing?
No, I'm really not. I will, it's just, I'm glad that I built a loyal base of people that support me and that like me. And so the podcast grew pretty exponentially. And if you looked at it, it didn't make any sense because Instagram was my biggest social network. And I didn't even have a lot of followers on there. So the podcast really started to scale up quickly, but didn't make sense due to what I had on Instagram. So when I hit 39th in the world, I had 17 episodes. And right around that time, I said, you know what? It's time to kick it into overdrive. Let's go over some big fish. So I emailed Grant Cardone. I snooped to find Grant Cardone's assistant's email. And I hit her up and I said, look, I got this podcast. It's 39th in the world right now in business category. I want to interview Grant. She said, okay, cool. Send me over links to all your social media. And I did. And she basically said, sorry, you're not big enough to interview Grant. So I said, okay, no problem, no big deal. So I knew 10X was coming up in February, so I bought a ticket. I wanted to go. I'd never been before. And he was doing a live stream one night, and I was, sitting in my computer working. And he said, look, guys, if you're coming to 10X GrowthCon, put 10X in the chat, and I'll accept you into the live stream. Dude, my fingers were hurting. I just spam, and he let me in. And I was like, what's going on, man? And he was like, how are you, buddy? And I had a 10X hoodie on, so it made it even better. And he was like, why are you coming? And I basically explained everything to him, told him. And then he said, thanks so much. We're going to bring some more people in. I appreciate you coming on. I said, Grant, one more thing, man. I interviewed yours. We're in front of, 5,000 people live right now. So I kind of had him in a little bit of a headlock. I said, Grant, I want to interview you. Kayla told me no, I want to do it. And I know he's not going to, I look like I'm 12. So I know he's not going to say no to this kid with a baby face in front of 5,000 people. So he's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Email Kayla again. Tell her I said I'm ready to roll. So what I did was I screen recorded the video, put it in a Google Drive, emailed it to her. And I was basically like, what's good? And she was like, okay, cool. We can do it. I was like, I want to do it in person in February. She's like, Grant can't do it right now. So I just kept relentlessly following up with her. And about 2 months after I had sent my last email, she hits me up and she's like, Grant can do it April 20th or April 19th or something like that. And I was just like, all right, cool. She's like, send me over the link right now and let's get everything in place. So that's how that happened. It was, one of the most fun podcasts I've ever done. It was really cool talking to him. I feel like I asked him some really good questions and we had a great conversation. So that's basically how that all happened. But it was about 8 months or 6 months from when I made my first touch. And I just kept being persistent. Most people get a no and they're like, okay, well, this is never going to work. I mean, there's no shame in following up. The worst thing somebody can do, I say it all the time, the worst thing somebody can do is just block you. I mean, who cares? Who cares if they don't want to, you got to keep being relentless with your follow-up, whether it's with a podcast, whether it's with your business, anything, and just keep following up, keep making those touches and reminding them, hey, I'm still here and I still want to do this. So don't get discouraged after the first no, because especially the people listening to this that are going to go out and try to start a podcast and they want to go out and build their network, people are going to say no. People are going to be rude. But as you start to, build and they see that you put in persistent effort, people are going to respect that and they're going to want to, be on your podcast or work with you or whatever.
No, I love that. I think it takes like a certain bit of salesmanship, like you said, and ability to take some no's and to grind through it. Like there's a lot of people, and for a long time, I was like this too, where you hear that no and you're like, okay, they don't want to be associated with me. But if you keep beating down that door, eventually you can break through.
I mean, it's with anything, man. Like when you first met your girlfriend, I'm sure you didn't see her and she just ran up to you and said, wow, Carson, I love you. That didn't happen. She probably rejected you a couple times. You probably stayed persistent with it. Now you've got a great relationship. It's not just in business, it's in everything. So I think that when you kind of make it make sense in people's minds, and you use an example like dating or an example like friends or anything like that, it makes more sense to people. But we were at an event in Philadelphia last week, and it was at the Mavericks Mansion. It was a beautiful event, so fantastic. They did a great job, but that's not the point. They said, "How many people in here are in sales?" And I raised my hand immediately, and there was about 2 hands that went up, and I couldn't hold myself back. I just said, "Everybody's in sales. Everything we do in life is driven by sales." You just have to. It might not be called sales, but at the end of the day, it's sales. Like Grant gives the best example of it. He was relentless with Elena for 13 months. He set his target and then he went after it. Now they're married. They got 2 kids. They got a great relationship. They built an empire together. So everything is sales at the end of the day when you break it down, and you got to be relentless with your follow-up. And that's why I still think to this day, sales is the most valuable skill that you can build. If you can learn how to sell things, and whether it's in life, with friends, with relationships, with your podcast, with your business, it doesn't matter. If you can learn sales and you can realize that everything in life is basically a game of sales, you'll be pretty well off.
I love that. For the record, though, my girlfriend and I were in love the second we met. Crazy. And just, I guess we're turning this into relationship advice. When you
really did it go? Let me ask you that. Did it go straight into that, or did you have to hit her up a few times and say, "Hey, let's go on a date"?
All right, so
or did she just immediately say yes?
This is revisionist history. It's kind of funny to look back because she says it didn't matter that I had an Instagram following and I had built somewhat of a brand, but we actually met through Instagram. All great things.
You're better looking guy. You're a little more famous, so I mean that makes sense. But dude, for a guy like me, man, from Nashville, with the weird haircut that I got going on right now, it's a little different. It takes a little bit more of a follow up, and you know what I mean.
Hey, no, this is a good segue though, but because she says she didn't know that I had built some kind of a brand, but I think she did. And I think if we would have met, 3 years ago, the conversation would have been a little bit different. Maybe she wouldn't have responded quite as easy. And that it's a segue here because the last thing I want to talk to you about is like positioning yourself as an expert. Like, how do you build that authority? Like, how do you make yourself like, I don't know, a position to put yourself in a position to get on other shows so that people like want to be associated with you. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that a lot of people try to fake their positioning, and I think that it hurts a lot of people's brand and reputation. A lot of people think, if I go out and I do this, or I take a picture in front of this car, or I, pay somebody to be on their podcast, or I go get some press, or whatever it may be, that they think that that's going to help their positioning. The best thing you can do for your positioning is prove it. Like I tell people all the time, I would call myself a podcast expert, and anybody that's been following me since day one can see exactly what I did. There's real proof. There's real numbers. I did it. I didn't go out and say, you know what, I'm going to go on some podcasts and talk about how I'm a podcast expert and take a picture in front of a Lamborghini and a big long caption about how podcasting is the reason that I'm standing in front of this Lamborghini. I just did it and proved it. And then eventually, once you prove it, people start to believe you, and they see you as a credible person to learn from.
100% true. And that's one of the reasons I had to finally put up or shut up and do this myself, because I've marketed podcasts for so long, and it's great to have case studies. It's great to have testimonials. It's great to have people say nice things about you. It's a whole nother thing when you go out and prove it and actually put your money where your mouth is. So people like you and our good buddy Casey Adams and all the people that have built great brands through podcasts, you all were the ones that pushed me over the edge to finally get this thing going and put it out there. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you having me on. And Andy Frisella talks about it all the time. You're the biggest, what would be the correct word? You're the biggest testimonial of your brand. He talks about all the time when he started to let his health and fitness get out of shape. First for him, looking at it on the chart, went way down, because they're looking at him like, you're selling me supplements, teaching me how to get in shape, and you're not in shape yourself. It doesn't make any sense. So you're the biggest, like I said, we've talked about, you doing this podcast is one of the best things you can do for your brand, because you're saying, I'm not just going to do it for you. I'm not just going to help you get on these charts and do everything that I can do, but I'm also doing it for myself. And I think a lot of times people have the most amount of respect for that. and then they can actually see, hey, these results are real. And this person's doing it themselves. You're never going to sell anything that you don't believe in, and you're never going to be able to sell anything that you can't do yourself, because that would make you a liar. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I'm glad you took the leap and you're doing this now, and I'm glad it's going really well.
100%. And just a shameless plug for us, anybody out there that wants to start getting on big shows, me and Mr. John Danes here are cooking up something big. So definitely stay tuned. John, I appreciate you being on the show. Tell the people where they can find you if they want to get in touch with you.
For sure. You can find me on Instagram at John Danes. The podcast is the No Excuses Show, www.johndanes.com. All the good stuff. It's all on my Instagram if you want to go find me. And Carson, I appreciate you having me on this show, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to build together.
All right, brother, let's do it. I'll talk to you soon, and thanks again for coming on.
For sure, man.
All right, John, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Giant Voices podcast. If you love the show, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Also, if you have questions, message us on Instagram at Giants_Voices or message Carson at Carson Jones.